AI is the Bill Cosby of tech. It's America's dad. You just can't leave it with your kids. So is AI taking our jobs? 3 college graduation speakers were booed the second they mentioned AI.
Deal with it.
I don't remember booing AOL or Clippy when I was in school. So why is the TikTok generation so scared of yet another technology? Could it have something to do with Aspergery billionaires preaching job replacement for the last 4 years? What's the real truth? Over the next 5 years, I give AI a 6.7 out of 10 as a risk for taking our jobs. Here's why. Overall layoffs are down. Unemployment, even graduate employment rates are holding steady. While it is true that anything done on a computer will eventually be done by a computer, that's a small part of most jobs. This is why EdTech failed. They tried to automate the least valuable part of education. Knowledge is everywhere, but we're social creatures. We want status, certification, social networks. None of that could be automated. And the same is happening in AI. It is a very powerful amplifier of human labor, but it will make up legal cases, misdiagnose medical conditions, or send a missile into your favorite Shake Shack. AI's biggest problem is platform risk. There's no better example than Microsoft. They have near infinite resources, and even it had to cut its AI budget when Anthropic went to token-based billing. The rest is shaky too. There are data centers that aren't being built. There are chips that aren't installed and are depreciating fast. Who can build a business on this kind of instability? I'm back. Now I'm going to try to do these lo-fi. The content will be as any decent Italian would do. Let's jump right into what's happening with AI over the next 5 years. All these people were being booed when they presented AI, and there's been so much negativity. And a lot of it is being funded by very nefarious sources. There's this guy, Singham is his last name. He lives in China, and he's very CCP, leftist, communist kind of guy, who's also a billionaire. All these guys, it's so funny. They're such hypocrites. They all made a fortune, and now like George Soros and this guy Singh and some of these others, Hassan Piker lives in a mansion, but they're all in love with fairness that they don't have to participate in. They've been stoking fear, as have all these AI doomers who are also funded by either corporate interests or others. Because keep in mind, when we fight, it creates gridlock. So it's in the interest of industry to create 2 strong opposing sides that beat the crap out of each other, so that way no legislation can get passed and they keep moving forward doing whatever they want. God forbid we all see we want the same things. We want jobs, we want homes, we want kids, we want pets, we want, all the, nice car, a vacation. Everyone wants the same things. Yeah, we differ on how we get there, but that could be a civilized conversation. But there are people who do not want that to happen because they will be net losers in any legislation passed that's somewhat sane. Anyway, so the same thing is happening in AI. The CEOs of these companies wanted to create this image of, oh my God, we have this revolutionary technology that's going to take jobs. It's going to make your company so much more efficient. It's going to create all these new products. And it may at some point, but it hasn't, not even close. It's just not in the numbers. And now I think they're all backtracking. So my original hypothesis when I first saw the technology and maybe bought into some of the hype until I started to use it was that it would create kind of inverse Baumol effect. And Baumol, I think his first name is William, he had this theory: when the wages of one group go up, all the other wages, the hairdressers, the food sellers, the drivers, also have to go up in order to keep up. Otherwise, they can't live in the area and they can't provide those services. So it has this, rising tide lifts all boats effect. And this is, and low wage immigration kind of has the opposite effect. You can flood a market with low wage labor or labor that's willing to work for much less. And all of a sudden, wages start to go down. By the way, and this is not a commentary on what's right or wrong. I certainly think it's fair that women compete with men. But that's kind of what happened when women were encouraged to go into the workforce. It lowered the price men could command in the marketplace because you've unleashed this new workforce that was hungry and willing to work. This also has a wage compression component to it. AI is like releasing millions, if not billions, of low-wage workers willing to do tasks for next to nothing, just the cost of electricity. My thought was that it would drive down wages. But then what I started to realize, the more I used the technology, the more I read about what other people were doing, we've released millions of interns into society. They're kind of workers, but they require infinite patience and babysitting and error checking. Maybe 1 in 7 is a star. And the others are just favors to your neighbor in Connecticut. Is this going to change? I looked at the stats on job replacement, and depending on which study, I went shopping for studies, and the longer you shop, you can find either more or less optimistic scenarios. So if you look at Andrej Karpathy, very smart guy, he's one of the top thinkers in this field. He came up with a number that 3.7 trillion in annual wages, or approximately 49 million workers, that's a third of the US workforce, are at risk from AI. Mostly non-executive jobs. So these are customer service, clerks, analysts, accountants, legal staff, marketers, these kinds of people. Drivers, of course, we know about. But then you keep looking and you're like, okay, well, MIT had something much more conservative. They're like, you know what? 11.7% of the workforce, not a third. So it's 3 times less. And then I kept shopping. I'm like, I could do better than this. And I found a Carnegie Mellon study. It concentrates the impact in math and engineering fields, and just a few splatters into business and finance and admin and sales and some of these other jobs that have quantitative and computer components, but not really fully computerized like development. So then I found this chart from FT, and FT broke down what the theoretical impact of AI was going to be on all these jobs. So they're like management, it's going to be near 100, finance, tech, engineering, sciences, legal, arts and media, administration. So all of those were in the 80s or 90s. You look at the actual impact so far, and it's really been in the 20 to 40% range for engineering, legal, a little bit in education, and administration. If I keep shopping, I'm going to find a lot more favorable studies. None of this impact is being reflected in college graduate employment or mass layoffs or anything else. In fact, Microsoft put out a report and said jobs for developers, which are supposed to be the most impacted in 2005, went up by 8.5%. So clearly, this isn't the nuclear bomb that everyone sold it to be, including the developers of these technologies who wanted to, buyers to think this is going to revolutionize their business. And so far it hasn't. Don't get me wrong. I really do think this will be a huge amplifier of human potential. The jobs that are going to be created are going to be inexplicable very soon. Just like the ones we have right now are inexplicable, and they're hard to foresee. And the people that are going to come up with them are just getting started. They're just kind of plugging into this technology. And you already see it with the entrepreneurs in tech, because people I know and then others I listen to on podcasts, they're already seeing startups that use fewer and fewer and fewer people, because that capacity is amplified. And it's understandable because most of them are tech oriented. So of course it's going to be where the efficiency happens first, but that's going to spread down to all workers, consultants and desk jockeys. If you master this technology, you're going to be so far ahead of others. It's sort of like you don't have to outrun a lion, just outrun all of your picnic mates. And someone's going to get eaten. It's not going to be you. Unfortunately, it's going to be grandma. I'm sorry to say, grandma will be eaten. And that's all your fault because you should have stayed and let the lion take you. Oh God, it got dark so fast. The other part of this is this H-1B shortage that's been sold, essentially just outsourcing labor. It's been abused like crazy, is over. Even if you don't decrease the number of developers that are in demand, even if demand keeps going up, as Microsoft said it is, you're turning everyone into developer. There are people vibe coding. That would actually be fun and potentially illegal, but they're vibe coding solutions to all kinds of things. I'm working with a startup now in the farming industry. They vibe coded their whole solution and it works really well. Everyone is a coder now. And when that happens, it's a pressure release valve on the industry. So this is a sidebar. I hate H-1Bs because they're structurally really bad. They're constantly abused. They're essentially outsourcing labor without forcing these companies to invest in domestic talent. They just want to pay less. What I realized recently that I hate most about this program is I don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of economic mercenaries. How much does that suck when all of your neighbors are just there for a buck? They're not there to invest in the country or care about anything else or vote or anything. And I get it from their perspective. They're like, look, I just want opportunity. I just want to work, send some money back home or whatever. I want people who commit. I am for immigration. I'm an immigrant, but I want people who commit. And H-1B brings in a bunch of mercenaries under mostly false pretenses. I'm going to get off my soapbox and get on this other soapbox of AI. OpenClaw was a huge boom. It's essentially a tool, an open source tool that allowed you to automate a bunch of tasks and create these agents that do a bunch of stuff. So some people created employee-free companies. I don't know how functional the companies are, but at least they were an interesting experiment. Another one was Jason Calacanis, who's got a bunch of podcasts and he's an investor. He created Podcast Employee in a Box. He had all of these functions that are performed, like booking guests and scheduling and transportation and editing, automated essentially, which I want to buy his service because I want these episodes to come out faster. I don't think open source is the future. I think a lot of people got the hint, or at least thought that this was going to open up the floodgates to open source. Open source is never going to outcompete hungry, dirty, voracious capitalists who are throwing so much talent into marketing and money into marketing and product development and user interface design and just selling it into people. So you're never going to defeat that with a bunch of ragtag developers working in their spare time on something open source. And I think the way that market is going to develop is similar to the way solar developed. Solar was kind of like, hey, do you want to be off the grid and power your own home and live free and never wear socks? I don't know what the full pitch was. The idea is that, yeah, you're kind of free, but there are times where you don't get enough energy and there are times where you make too much. So most solar powered homes are kind of independent, but they're also connected to a public grid and they're connected to private utilities, and they all work in synchrony, where if you produce too much, you sell it back to the utility. If you don't have enough and you need, it gets cloudy and your batteries run out, if you're running AC 24/7, then you might need energy from the grid. And I think the same thing will happen in AI, where you'll have some home-based solutions that work really well. Others will be using open source in fact, this is happening now. There are all these Chinese models that are, listen, you don't want to be the first CEO to trust your business to a Chinese model. You don't want to be the first congressman to trust a Chinese model, which is what Eric Swalwell, I think he dated a Chinese spy. Anyway, there are startups now that are taking these open source models, they're auditing them to make sure there's nothing funky in there that, phones back to China, but they're also hosting them domestically and making sure that they work safely and turning it into business. So it's still not quite open source, but it is some sort of weird hybrid of open source and private sector. So I think that's really how it's going to play out. In general, I think this technology is still very half-baked. You have a ton of these GPUs sitting in warehouses. Now, I've read different numbers on this. Some people say that the life of a GPU or the useful life is about 3 years. There's a very good chance that these things are going to sit in warehouses for much longer than that. Others say it could be as much as 5 years, but then they're so much less efficient and less powerful than the new ones coming out. So you've basically wasted most of your money if they sat around. And there's tons of data center projects that are stalled for a variety of reasons. But a lot of it is knee-jerk reaction by people, like the same people who like to protest pipelines and protest, wars and protest everything because they just need to protest. They hate the country, they hate progress, they hate whatever. They're not competing really well because if they were, they wouldn't be available to protest midday on a Tuesday. A lot of this is through NGOs, so it's astroturfed. It makes it look like it's grassroots, but China's funding a bunch of these NGOs. So there's a lot of shady stuff going on. I think I heard Kevin O'Leary, who's trying to build a data center in Arizona, he did an audit and he found all these kind of shady, dark money groups funding all of this doomerism. The technology itself, it's got the sum total of all human knowledge, but then it still screws up legal cases. It's still misdiagnosis. And I get it. It's still early, but you can't really trust it. It's, as I said, the Bill Cosby of tech. You can't leave it with your kids. And I had a situation where I tried to put a document where I had all of my predictions analyzed and links to where the original predictions were. And I asked AI, I gave it all the source documents. I said, hey, can you just link these predictions to the original sources online or wherever? And it just made up a bunch of fake links. It destroyed this document. So I had to go back and do everything manually because it just hallucinated a bunch of links that was a shortcut or whatever, just maybe didn't want to spend tokens. This stuff can't be trusted, especially for things that are mission critical, medical or military or photographing Alec Baldwin. These are things that can't be trusted to AI. There's still a lot of problems with the legal frameworks. There aren't any. There's no privacy protections at all. And they're building deeper profiles than Google or Facebook ever dreamed of. Because can you imagine, like all of our darkest secrets? I had a medical situation, where the doctors, I was in the emergency room 3 times over the course of a week, and the doctors failed to diagnose. I had an internal bleed. They couldn't diagnose it. It wasn't until I fed this into all my symptoms into Gemini that, first of all, it told me this is not something you can deal with at home anymore. So in that respect, it did save me because they did give me fluids and eventually a blood transfusion. AI did an infinitely better job than the doctors in diagnosing my problem and potentially saving my life. I had a huge gash in my stomach that was bleeding, and it was completely missed and misdiagnosed by all of these doctors. I probably have a malpractice lawsuit on my hands that I don't know if I'll get around to. These doctors can't be trusted either. So AI is already better in a lot of situations. It's just not there yet for every single use case. In our minds, this is a car that's replacing the horse. We're the horse in this scenario, and this is the new digital brain that we've created. But what if it's just a roided up horse and there's only so fast it can run? We just keep jabbing it with more and more compute, but we're just amplifying all of the mistakes that it's capable of making. It just makes them faster. It's like, oh yeah, we got these fake links faster to you. We got them to you in no time at all. It can get to this point where it functions more like a proper neural network when it's multi-sensory, where it can see and hear and taste. Taste will be weird, but there's a guy named Jan LeCun that I followed, who I kind of disagree with in some cases, but he's now starting a company that does this, where it's supposed to pick up from the real world and build its AI that way. And others think that a super intelligence is around the corner. A lot of this is years away. Robots are years away. I guess technically self-driving cars are robots. So that's probably the closest thing that's potentially going to take over a lot of jobs. But you see these dancing robots from Boston Dynamics. These are future wartime executioners, but they're dancing, they're having a good time. But even those are years away, because a perfect opportunity to unleash them, if they were ready, would be on Iran, because we're clearly not ready to send troops there. So I would have thought that, the reason we're engaging with Iran, because clearly they don't think they're going to win just with air power. This is the chance where the military, which can afford all the latest and greatest technology, that's when they drop all of these death robots onto Iran and they take over the country. No, they didn't. So if the military doesn't have them ready to go, then sure as hell, you're not going to have one making you eggs in the kitchen. Curb your enthusiasm is what I'm saying. And recently, Dara, I'm going to butcher his last, I'm not even going to try his last name, the CEO of Uber, he said, look, we're not getting ROI on all of these expenditures on AI. So he's cutting back. And I've heard a lot of similar stories from others because, look, the numbers just aren't there. It's gotten really expensive, especially now that they're charging per token. And no one is really seeing the big numbers. There's a lot of circular financing deals between these companies. So that leads people to believe, this may be a bubble. I'm not prepared to say that, because I'll be honest with you, I haven't studied that component closely enough. I can see circumstances where step improvements in the technology could dramatically improve ROI. So I'm not that dubious, because so much is being innovated so quickly that I would be hesitant to point fingers. And yeah, maybe there is a bubble. But the example that just blows my mind, in terms of the business model, and really that's where the biggest problem here is. And when I say business model, how they price it for the value that's received by customers. And I just keep going back to this Microsoft example, because it's insane if you think about it. Microsoft, which owns 49% of OpenAI, the leader, or at least, up until recently, the leader in AI, it also sells its own AI solution to other companies, Copilot. And it has near infinite processing resources, infinite cache, and still they just had to cut back on compute costs because their developers were using so many tokens, but they were on fee-based billing. So they were paying, I don't know how much, 200 per seat or whatever. But then Anthropic, which is kind of funny, they're not even eating their own cooking. It's not like they're sitting there using Copilot to code or OpenAI. They're using Anthropic to code. Anthropic's like, we can't afford this. You're gonna make us bankrupt. So they're like, we're moving to, and they didn't do it specifically for Microsoft. They did it for a lot of their clients. They're like, we can't do this anymore. We're gonna charge per token. And guess what? That blew up Microsoft's budget. And they're like, okay, well, we're gonna have to cut back. And same thing is happening on the consumer side. I got an email from Gemini. I'm a Gemini subscriber, and they were like, hey, we're gonna limit your token use because, and it wasn't just me personally, it's just across the board, people are using too much. And even Google, with all of its servers, all of its technology, was like, we can't afford to give this thing away. And a lot of companies are just doing that. So this whole thing is in flux, and it's undergoing this major repricing that's not unlike what food producers do during inflation. They don't just raise the price because then it's like, they're going to lose tons of sales because, you show up the next day and the bag of chips instead of $2.99 is $4.99. You're like, okay, do I really need chips? I want to look beautiful. But I'll risk looking ugly and fat if I can get the chips for $2.99. Anyway, what they do is they do shrinkflation, put less product in, but the container stays the same, or they put a bunch of fillers in, or they replace it with cheaper ingredients, or they rework their supply chains and start getting it from, getting their fruit from Mexico instead of from California. Same thing is happening with AI companies. They're sneaking in these new limits on tokens where there weren't before, or they're nudging users towards their more expensive models because now these aren't as functional. And they're secretly routing queries to cheap, dumb models. You're not going to get the pro version or the fast version because that uses too many tokens. We're going to give you this stupid one that's going to give you kind of generic answers. In some cases, it's fine, but in a lot of cases, that's not what you paid for or expected or was sold to you. We thought we were outsourcing our brains to digital Einsteins, but they want to sell us digital Epsteins. Business model-wise, what they're trying to do is the same thing that Uber and Amazon and even China did. They underprice for a very long time, eat all of those losses, and then eventually pull the rug and raise prices once they have dominant market share. And the problem is compute is so expensive, so punishing, and there's also such constraints on processing. There's just not enough data centers that token costs are going to incinerate their businesses. So they couldn't keep that strategy up. So they had to degrade the service. If they can't keep subsidizing tokens and they can't follow through with this strategy, this thing stalls long before we're all junkies. Can something this unstable, this unsteady, predictably steal jobs? At this point, the answer is no. And things can change, but it just hasn't happened. There are potential black swans or swans of color. My chief vocabulary officer said that's more inclusive. This is a new, powerful, and extremely lucrative technology. You're going to have a lot of surprises here. And one of the biggest threats and challenges is going to be from the outside. It's going to be China. So just as I was writing this, China announced a 75% price cut for its DeepSeek model, which is now 11.5% cheaper on input and 34.5% cheaper on output. And same thing with Claude. It's 28.7 times cheaper and then 17.2 times cheaper than Sonnet, which is the other Anthropic model. Eventually, corporations are going to have a hard time justifying why they're not using because costs have to come down on our side as well. And Quen, which is Alibaba's model, also Chinese, just got faster and cheaper. And then on the hardware side, Huawei just announced us a workaround to allow it to make chips that are competitive with Intel. It said Intel and top global competitors. Now, Intel isn't the leader in GPUs, but it is in CPUs. They're going to do it because the beatings in China will never stop until they do. So they will keep at it until they're able to compete. They're not going to let America just have this futuristic industry. It's just not going to happen. In a way, China's making a play for American brains and our intellectual property in the same way that they did with TikTok and with outsourced manufacturing, because TikTok is essentially a brainworm promoting things that divide us that China thinks will make us less competitive. Same thing with IP theft. BYD, the reason it's such a low-cost technology leader in electric cars is because they took, allegedly, all of this technology and stole it from Tesla, which was forced to manufacture in China. And so in case you don't know, I was part of a group in one of my previous employers where we tried to enter the Chinese market. You can't just enter the Chinese market. you have to do a deal if you're in finance with China Union Pay. Or if you're in tech, you have to do a deal with one of their major manufacturers in order to produce in the country. And that is how they suck out all of your intellectual property, all of your customer data, and eventually shove you to the side. We didn't want to do that. You had to give them, was it 50% of the profits? Anyway, it was untenable. And I don't know if this trip Trump took to China with all these CEOs is going to change any of that. I personally doubt it, because I think it's a lot of like, yeah, we would love to work with you. And then on the back end, nothing happens. China is not the only force that can change the trajectory of progress here. It could be energy capacity, could be data center panic. It could be these Luddite politicians that are scared because they're not really leaders. They're just reacting to what they think constituents want. Could be a catastrophic error created by the technology. It's sort of like when you have a nuclear plant that leaks, like in Japan. It's very conceivable that there are enough political forces that say, hey, we should lay off this technology for a while. That certainly is what happened with 3 Mile Island here in the US, where all the activists basically stalled progress on future construction of nuclear plants. And it could also be consolidation in the industry or new breakthroughs in the technology or new applications. There's a lot of black swans that are circling this business. It can go in a lot of different directions. I wrote in 2016, now exactly 10 years ago, in 50 years, staring at laptops all day will seem as bizarre as driving to a strip mall to rent a movie. The 50 years came in 10. It's hard to imagine anyone who makes PowerPoints for a living feeling indispensable. Man, these people really need me. If I wasn't moving these little boxes around, who would do that? I guess some people did believe that, look, our identities are wrapped up in our jobs. Our livelihoods are wrapped up in our jobs. So we have to, on some level, suspend disbelief and think that it's important, we're important, and so on. But every once in a while, there'd be sort of a piercing of the veil, and you would have like a major layoff, or you're like, oh my God, I can't believe he got laid off or she got laid off or whatever. You would have meetings where you sat there and you're like, this is such a waste of time, so much BS. Why am I here? And so you kind of knew that, look, this is kind of performance art. We're all doing a show. And then I remember when Elon fired like 60% of Twitter and Twitter ran better, people were like, oh my God. Even in the tech industry, they were like, hey, we're probably carrying a ton of fat in our business. That exists everywhere. There's a lot of fat. And AI is tech Ozempic, which will help companies slim down, but it'll also sweep all of these reasons why we got fat under the rug. It's like one of those Bugs Bunny cartoons where there's just giant lumps under the rug. We've got a 5 million line tax code. We've got an insane, complicated legal system. We've got a labyrinth of processes and providers to do anything, and then more anythings than ever. You've got all these little relationships to manage. Oh, now I have a mobile provider and an internet service and a streaming service providers, insurance policies, and now I have a dog and the dog needs insurance. So now you have all these relationships, all this complexity in your life. Now you need AI to help you simplify it, but also kind of paper over it. And the same thing is going to happen in the corporate environment. The irony is the fat is the job. We are the fat. I use the example of EdTech. In education, they tried to automate learning. Learning is not the point. The point of going to college is you're getting a certificate that others respect. It's about status. It's also about the networks you build. Those are people who will help you potentially in the future get jobs, and they'll be your friends and members of your social club and social circle. They automated the least valuable part of the value chain. And the same thing is happening here. The knowledge and the thinking, to some extent, is kind of a commodity. It's all of that social stuff around it that's hard. Getting others to buy into your thinking and others to think that this is the right solution for them. That's where the art comes in. And that's where the bulk of jobs reside. This is not about task efficiency. This is a social enterprise. Every job, to some extent, is a social enterprise. And so what is it going to take to survive in this future? So even if we accept that AI is not the substitute, it's just the rocket booster to many careers, it kind of leaves us with a dilemma. You thought that you would have a lack of meaning in your life when you lost your job to AI, but there might be a potentially worse outcome in some ways where you have a job, but it's so mind-numbingly esoteric, so far removed from any reality that you know. That's where your dissatisfaction comes from. You have right now B2B digital marketing strategist. Sounds kind of silly and kind of dispensable, but now you're going to have context auditors, avatar stylists, prediction market compliance officers. The struggle for meaning is coming from this abstraction that's so far removed from the real world. There will be great jobs in the real world, but no one seems to want them. No one wants to be a mechanic or a welder. And there are plenty of those jobs, and they eventually pay 6 figures and offer free training. But no one wants to sit in the middle of Ohio somewhere. They want to be on Instagram. They want to be stars. They want whatever. And I think I've seen that there's an uptick now in those careers because, look, that's where the money is. I thought about, well, what's going to survive in this world? I broke it down into personal skills and qualities, things that we should promote in our children, hopefully still in ourselves, and job characteristics. It's hard to predict the specific jobs that are going to come out of this, but at least the features of jobs that will arise. Let's start with the skills and qualities. Curiosity. That's really the most important thing. How does this work? How do I figure this out? Trustworthiness. Making your word your bond. That will put you above others in whatever selection process for even if there are fewer jobs, which we don't know yet. Being articulate, being able to express yourself, express your ideas. Even if you got your ideas from AI, like I joked when AI first came out, I'm like, this technology made everyone into Cyrano de Bergerac. So every dumb pipe fitter all of a sudden is like writing the most beautiful poetry to their girlfriends. And then she has to see him in real life. And he's still blue collar goon, nice guy, but good luck squeezing another poem out of him in real life. It's never going to happen. Creates this fake reality. But if you can articulate ideas, it shows you at least understand them and internalize them and can hopefully use them to convince people, persuade or sell or whatever your function is. The other thing is being calm in adversity and emotionally regulated. We have seen the exact opposite, whether it's Trump derangement syndrome or whatever it's called on the other side, people yelling at each other. I mean, look, my theory is we were just meant to farm, but instead, everyday people, normal people who have never shown any aptitude for these subjects, now forced to deal with the traumas of the world through social media. And their brains are melting. The people who are able to maintain composure in that world are going to have a huge, huge advantage. The other thing is adaptability. It's pretty self-explanatory. I said self-explanatory, and I was just about to explain it and held myself back. Competitiveness, problem solving, and being entrepreneurial, being ambitious and self-driven. You're not going to get assignments anymore. You're going to have to self-assign a lot of this stuff. Consistency. Make sure that you're delivering. And I'll admit that I've been bad at it sometimes because I tried to do too much and I would get sporadic with my newsletters and my episodes because whatever, I got busy with work. And so you need to force yourself into consistency sometimes, even if it drops down quality. And that's something that I'm trying to internalize and do better. And I guess you'll know for sure when the next episode comes out. Physical fitness, super important. Eating healthy, all that stuff. Even knowing how to cook your own meals, that's super important. That's not taught in schools, but should be. Delayed gratification. Everyone wants everything instantaneously. And why wouldn't they? The Uber arrives within 3 minutes and next day is the latest you're going to get your Amazon, your front door. It's like Christmas every time you open your front door. Grit and determination. There are going to be setbacks. So how you deal with those is so important. Having a sense of humor about things. You're going to need it. There's going to be some crazy stuff that goes on in times of great technological change. Having self-respect and respect for others. There's a lot of reasons that I don't know, maybe some legitimate, some illegitimate, that people feel ire towards certain people, sometimes towards people they've never met. That's insane. But just a general level of respect can go a long way. And I'm hoping that we can restore it to society. Although some days I'm not so sure. And sportsmanship, I mentioned competitiveness earlier. Yeah, be competitive, but shake their hand and really, be a good winner and loser. In terms of job characteristics for the next 5 years, anything that's sensory and tactile is still very difficult to replace. Anything that's out in nature, anything that's fitness related is also going to be hard because, it's recreational and it's physical. And the reason people are out is because they want to break from this digital trap that they've put themselves in, or that society to some extent did. Anything dealing or working with animals, skilled trades, anything that has high variability, because even if you're fixing toilets, they're all mounted differently. Their problem's going to be different. So that's going to be a long time before a robot shows up. Entertainment, it's still going to stay a low probability industry. The only reason I'm doing content is because I think, maybe wrongly, who knows, that I can say things in a unique enough way and have enough personality that you won't want to summarize this through AI. And you can summarize my whole life into 6 bullets and then just put a bullet in your head because what are you living for? Because there's art to this, and hopefully there's enough art here where you want to listen. And I'm trying to strike that balance between entertainment and information density, AKA infotainment. To some extent, we're all entertainers now. Bureaucracy, that's the slowest to change. You're going to have that government job for a long time. They're very reluctant to fire, despite what the Trump administration did with Doge. That's the exception, not the rule. And sad to say, ideologues and revolutionaries will continue to have jobs. In times of change, people are looking for answers. So the conspiracy theorists, people will seek them out because they want order to the chaos. Even a conspiracy gives you this feeling like there's someone behind all of this, all of these things that are screwing up my life, all of these things that are going wrong. There is a secret cabal or a force or whatever, the pyramid with the eye in it, that is guiding all of this. And if only we can solve this, then all of my problems will go away. That's also an ideology, and religion falls into that, and all these other belief systems, political ones. People are just going to want answers, and they're going to gravitate towards the easy ones. The average grade is a C. Only 30% went to college, and arguably some of them are wildly miseducated because they lean on their education, not on their critical thinking. But then the other people are incapable of critical thinking, and they're critical thinking themselves into conspiracies. Pick your poison. The final one, military. There is going to be unrest, whether it's at a local level with police or at an international level with wars. In times of great change, there are going to be power struggles. And there's also forces, the military-industrial complex, famously, as Eisenhower said in his final speech, is going to be a free-for-all. I'm going to revisit a lot of these themes in the future, some in more detail, some are going to change over time. But if you enjoyed this, please subscribe, tell a friend, tell a family member, and cultivate your AI resistance. If you want me to help predict your company's future and growth opportunities, or to speak or advise your startup, email ideas@ideafactory.com, and factories with a K. See you next week. And by the way, not all these episodes are going to be so long and detailed. Some of them are going to be short and to the point.